The risks associated with climate change, if we fail to manage it properly, can be seen already with problems of water, problems of heat waves, problems of desertifications, cyclones, hurricanes, all becoming more intense. But we have to recognize that what we're seeing now is very small, difficult and damaging though it is very small relative to what we risk. It's still less than 1 degree centigrade in average surface temperature above the second half of the 19th century, which is the usual point of comparison. We could be, if we follow our track now, around 4. And we don't know for sure, but around 4 means there's risks of 5 and 6. That is something, 4 degrees centigrade, we haven't seen on this planet for 20, 30 million years. Our society is about 10,000 years old from the period, the Holocene, since the last ice age. And temperature has been very narrow, in a range plus or minus 1 or so during that Holocene period. That's the period when we grew up as civilizations, when we settled in villages because we were sowing wheat or grass that we developed and cultivated into grains. That's the period we became who we are. Just 10,000 years. We risk temperatures we haven't seen on this planet for 20 or 30 million years. It could transform the reasons we live where we live. At points on rivers which are convenient for ports or crossings, by the sea, convenient for sea transport, places where the weather allows you, doesn't batter you into submission. That's why we live where we live. That could all change. So you could see hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people having to move. And that would devastate those people, but it would also lead to intense conflict as people move. We are all affected by this, but it's the poorest places, poorest people that are hit earliest and hardest. We have to understand the scale of this risk. And this could happen in 100 years. You know, it took a few thousand years to warm up from the Ice Age, where you were 4 or 5 degrees lower than now. We could go 4 or 5 degrees higher in 100 years. People don't really don't understand fully the scale of those risks. So that's very important in thinking about development. So in other words, we risk destroying all we've done in the last 50, particularly last 50 years or so, as a world on poverty reduction, to set it back, to destroy it, to undermine it, and perhaps permanently, or at least for a very long time, because if we do generate those effects through our casualness, our negligence, our inaction, if we do generate those effects in this way, very hard to back out, very hard to unravel. You can't make a peace treaty with the laws of physics or a climate which you have fatally undermined. So that's the starting point. But there's some very good news in all this, which is that as soon as you recognize what you have to do, cut back on emissions strongly, go zero by the end of the century from about 50 billion tons CO2 per annum, CO2 equivalent per annum with all the greenhouse gases. Now, you have to cut that back down to about 20 in the middle of the century and close to zero by the end. And if you look at what's involved in doing that, making better cities, much more efficient, easier to get around, less congested, less polluted, managing our agriculture and grassland in a much better way, you know, with water harvesting and terracing to make it green again, protecting our forests, and building energy systems from, based mostly around renewables, which have plummeted down in cost because we've got serious. There are lots of things we have to do on the way. We have to think about grids and storage and managing the systems. We have to think about how we make our cities much more compact, how we increase productivity in agriculture and make the soil stronger. Lots of things to do. and not all of them will be easy, but we can see how to do all of them, and it's going to be a much more attractive way with higher living standards, sustainable, cleaner, more energy secure, more biodiverse, and altogether a much more attractive way, less time wasted in traffic jams in cities. There's so much that we can do that's really attractive. So doing nothing is deeply, deeply negligent, reckless, and doing something strong to radically reduce those risks, we will find enormously attractive. Well, I think you're referring to a document, Better Growth, Better Climate, which was from a commission, the Global Commission on Economy and Climate, or the New Climate Economy, which was chaired by President Calderon, former president of Mexico, and I co-chaired that, and I chaired the Economic Advisory Panel. We had this long-term view of where we need to go this century to cut back by a factor of 60% between, or at least 50% between now and 2050, and go down to zero at the end of the century. So we took that long-term view on emissions, but we said, well, that's going to be shaped fundamentally by what we do in the next 15 or 20 years, and we focused explicitly on 15, because it's how you start that's going to make an enormous difference. Why is it so important just now, why you start? You can say it's always important how you start, but it's particularly important how you start now, because the majority of the investment that's going to come in infrastructure and elsewhere in the coming years will be in the emerging market and developing countries. That's where the big bulk of investment and growth will take place. In 15 years or so, there'll be another billion people in cities. By the middle of the century, probably the number of people in cities will close to double. But the next 15 years, probably around 1 billion. Many places going through periods where it's very important to invest strongly in energy. Just take those two things. The cities and how you invest in cities, how you organize your cities, casts a shadow for centuries. Many of the Roman roads have shaped London, and they've shaped then the London Underground, because many of it goes under the roads. What you do in cities, Atlanta is about the same income per capita and about the same number of people as Barcelona. It emits more than 10 times the emissions because it's so sprawled out. Now, there are many places in the world who will be building and designing the cities, and they're doing it now because the people are coming now, or they're just letting it happen. So how we decide on our cities and energy systems in the next 15 or 20 years will be enormously important to what we can do in the rest of the century, not only because they lock in so much. No, coal-fired power plant lasts for 30, 40, 50 years, so does a nuclear. I mean, what you do in energy in cities casts a very long shadow into the future, and the rapid change, the big investments are taking place now. Of course, it's enormously important on the survival of our forests and what happens to our grasslands. That's why the next 15 years is so important, because of the long shadows it casts into the future and how much we can discover. Because if we push very hard on those investments, we're going to learn and discover at a really rapid rate, as we have done in past industrial revolutions. And past industrial revolutions have seen waves of change with strong investment, strong innovation, starting with the mechanization of textiles in the 19th century all the way through to the industrial revolutions of information communication technology, which we're in the middle of, or well, maybe we haven't even got to the middle now. And they give you this great period of investment, innovation, discovery. So we need to launch that, because we have to change very strongly by the middle of the century, by the end of the century. We have a very strong, long path to go. So we mustn't lock in bad things, and we put a lot of energy into discovering those things. We know many of them already, but we can make so much progress. There are many different types of smaller countries. I mean, you've got some very poor, small states. I mean, sub-Saharan Africa has got, I forget the number exactly, 48, 49 states. Many of them have 5 or 10 million people. You have Mauritius in the middle of the Indian Ocean. You have Singapore, which is a very small place but has become very rich. Some of them have natural resources, some of them don't. Some of them have hydropower, some of them don't. So you have to be very careful about generalization, but what you can say is there are always strong options from doing what you do much more efficiently. Many of them, for example, waste food. 30 or 40% of food is lost in developing countries, and 30 or 40% food is lost or wasted in rich countries. It's quite similar actually, although the reasons can be different in different places. Some places might be storage, other people are just wasteful and they throw it away. So everyone has a big margin for raising incomes, saving resources, reducing emissions by looking at efficiency in the use of everything we do. The International Energy Agency reckons that energy efficiency will be about half of what we need to do, but it's efficiency right across the board, not just energy. They can invest in their people. It's what people can do, the education, the physical abilities they have, how well they are. Sick people are not very productive, so that's very important as well. So I'd say resource efficiency, investing very strongly in people, and working to protect land use in a very strong way, whether it be agriculture and forests, increasing the productivity of agriculture, protecting and using much better the forests, or land use in cities and towns. And there's so much we can do to make them much more efficient and much more attractive. Some of it will be organizational, like the way we allow cars and so on into city centres. Others it will be investing in public transport. Other ways it will be where we promote the building of houses and homes and business activities. So I would focus on those areas: waste, people and land and cities, and of course all the infrastructure that's necessary. The biggest parts always in the infrastructure bill are energy and transport, but of course water also very important. Every country has to look at its own position, but I think those principles can be very helpful wherever you are, and there are quite a lot of good examples now.